It is Saturday, March 25, 1911, 4:45 in the afternoon. In Greenwich Village, Manhattan, the weekend is beginning. On Washington Place, street vendors are folding up their carts. Children are chasing each other between the legs of men in flat caps and long coats. The smell of roasting chestnuts drifts from a corner cart. A horse-drawn wagon splashes through wet cobblestones. Somewhere below, the subway rattles under the street. 8 stories above all of it, in the Triangle Waste Company factory, 500 workers are finishing the last 15 minutes of their Saturday shift. Mostly women, mostly teenagers, mostly immigrants, Italian girls from Mulberry Street, Jewish girls from the Lower East Side who came to America with nothing and found work here, bent over sewing machines 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, producing the shirtwaist blouses that fashionable American women wore. They are tired, their fingers ache, but it is Saturday, the Sabbath is coming. They are talking about what they will cook for dinner, about boys, about the letters they will write home to their mothers in Naples and Minsk and Palermo, who ask if America is as golden as they promised. In 18 minutes, 146 of them will be dead. The exit doors are locked, the fire escapes do not work, and the 2 men who own this factory are already on the roof. This is the story of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire, the most preventable disaster in New York City history, and the crime that nobody went to jail for. To understand what happened at the Triangle Factory, you first need to understand the building they worked in, and why it was a trap before the first match was ever struck. The Asch Building, 10 stories of red brick and terracotta on the corner of Washington Place and Green Street in Greenwich Village. Built in 1901, brand new by the standards of the neighborhood. Its owners had boasted it was fireproof. The floors were concrete. The stairwells were metal framed. They were not wrong about the building. They were wrong about what filled it. The Triangle Waste Company occupied the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors. 500 workers. Rows of sewing machines packed so tightly that 2 people could not pass each other sideways between them. Beneath those machines, and piled in every corner, were fabric scraps, cotton and linen, the most flammable materials on earth, accumulating for weeks between cleanings. The foreman dumped them in bins. The bins overflowed. Nobody cared because nobody was required to care. Now picture the exits. 2 narrow stairwells, 1 on each side of the building. 1 passenger elevator, operated by hand, capable of carrying 12 people. And 1 fire escape. A single metal ladder bolted to the outside of the building, winding down the rear exterior wall, ending 6 feet above a courtyard gate that was padlocked shut. That was it. For 500 people. On 3 floors. 8 stories up. But there was one more thing. The most important thing. The door at the bottom of the Green Street stairwell, the eastern exit, the one closest to most of the 9th floor workers, was locked. A padlock through the bolt. Standard practice at the Triangle factory. Workers were searched at the end of every shift. Management didn't trust them not to steal scraps of fabric. So the door stayed locked. All day. Every day. Blanck and Isaac Harris knew it was locked. They had locked it. 14 fire inspectors had visited the Triangle factory between 1909 and 1911. Multiple reports flagged the overcrowding, the fabric waste, the inadequate exits. The owners paid their fines, small fines, a few dollars, and returned to business. In 1911, there was no law that required an unlocked exit. There was no law that required a working fire escape. There was no law that required a fire drill. There was nothing to force them to care, so they didn't. Blanck and Isaac Harris had built the Triangle Waste Company into one of the most profitable garment businesses in New York. They were immigrants themselves, Russian Jews who had arrived in America with nothing and climbed through the garment trade to become millionaires. They understood, better than anyone, the work their employees did. They had done it. That made what came next not ignorance. It made it a choice. By 1911, the Triangle factory was producing 1,000 shirtwaist blouses a day. Their workers earned between $7 and $12 a week, for 60-hour weeks, for work that left their fingers bleeding and their eyes strained. When workers attempted to unionize in 1909, Blanck and Harris hired men to intimidate them. When workers went on strike, they waited them out. Their annual profit, hundreds of thousands of dollars. They had insured the Triangle factory for $400,000, far above its assessed value. They knew the building's risks better than any inspector. And they had made a calculation. The fines for fire code violations were cheaper than the cost of compliance. The math worked in their favor. On the afternoon of March 25, 1911, both men were on the 10th floor with their families. Their children sometimes came to the factory on Saturdays. When the fire started, they went to the roof. 4:40 p.m. The bells ring. Saturday's shift is over. Workers on the 8th floor begin gathering their coats and bags. Near the cutting tables on the eastern side of the 8th floor, a spark finds the bin beneath the cutting tables. The bin is full. It has been full for weeks. The fabric scraps catch immediately. In a cotton factory, fire does not smolder. It explodes. 4:41 p.m. Someone shouts fire. The 8th floor erupts in movement. Workers rush for the exits. The Washington Place stairwell. The Green Street stairwell. The elevator operator, a 19-year-old named Joseph Zito, begins running loads of workers downstairs as fast as the hand-operated cable allows. 12 people per trip. He makes 4 trips into the burning building before the heat warps the shaft and the elevator stops moving. A phone call goes up to the 8th floor. Another goes to the 10th floor, where the owners are. They go to the roof. Nobody calls the 9th floor. The 9th floor, where 250 workers are packed tightest, where the locked door is, discovers the fire only when smoke begins rising through the floorboards beneath their machines. 4:43 p.m. Workers on the 9th floor rush for the Green Street stairwell door. It is locked. They rush for the Washington Place stairwell. It is jammed. Workers from the 8th floor are already flooding down. They rush for the elevator. The elevator is not coming. They rush for the fire escape. 250 people pushing toward a ladder 18 inches wide, bolted to a wall that is now on fire. 4:45 p.m. The first person reaches the windows. Not everyone ran for themselves. On the 8th floor, a bookkeeper named Dinah Lipschitz picked up the telephone and called upstairs. The 10th floor, the only number she had. She saved the owners' lives, and the lives of everyone on the 10th floor who reached the roof and crossed to the neighboring building. In the elevator shaft, Joseph Zito, 19 years old, kept running his car. Down with workers. Back up into the smoke. Down again. Back up again. On his 4th trip, he could feel the heat of the fire through the elevator walls. The cables were beginning to seize. He made one more trip. His final load of passengers was the last group to leave the building alive by elevator. On the 9th floor, a young worker named Yetta Weber helped the 2 women beside her reach the window ledge before climbing out herself. She made it. The 2 women she helped also made it. In the chaos of 250 people dying in 18 minutes, those 2 women were alive because one person looked sideways instead of only forward. The New York Times would run 146 names the next morning. Most Americans do not know a single one. Let's say one. Rosie Friedman, 21 years old, from Kalarash, in what is now Moldova. She had been in America for 4 years. She sewed collars on the 9th floor. She earned $7 a week. She sent money home every month. On March 25, 1911, she ran to the locked door, then to the window, and then she was gone. She is buried in Washington Cemetery in Brooklyn. Her grave marker, paid for by the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, reads simply, "A Triangle Fire Victim." 4:45 p.m. The fire department receives the call. Engine Company 72, the closest station, is on the street in under 2 minutes. They arrive at the Asch Building to find a building that looks, from the outside, almost normal. A few windows flickering orange on the upper floors. Smoke beginning to pour from the roof. They unroll their hoses. They extend their ladders. The ladders reach the 6th floor. The Triangle factory is on the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors. The New York City Fire Department, in 1911, had no equipment capable of reaching a fire above the 6th floor of a building. The chief of the fire department, Edward Croker, had warned the city about this exact scenario 2 years earlier. He had asked for better equipment. The request was denied. Too expensive. Chief Croker arrived on Washington Place and later said that he understood immediately there was nothing he could do for the people above the 6th floor. Nothing. He watched them fall. And he could not stop it. 4:47 p.m. The first person appears at a 9th floor window. A young woman. She looks down. 8 stories. Cobblestones below. She looks back into the room behind her. The room is on fire. She steps off the ledge. 4:48 p.m. A second person. Then 3 at once. Then too many to count. People dropping from the windows of the 8th and 9th floors. Some jumping outright. Some hanging from the ledge by their fingers until they fell. A photographer named Charles Hine was on Washington Place that afternoon. He raised his camera. He took photographs. He later said he was unable to look at his own negatives for 3 days. The crowd on the street, 500 people and growing, stood in silence. Some tried to hold fire hoses as nets. The bodies went through them. A young reporter named William Shepard was on the phone with the United Press, dictating his story live from the street. He said, "I learned a new sound today. A sound more horrible than description. I call it the thud dead sound." 4:52 p.m. On the 9th floor, 20 workers reached the fire escape. They climbed down. The fire escape shutters under the weight. At the 6th floor landing, the heat-warped bolts release from the wall. The fire escape tears away from the building. It swings outward, then drops. Workers fall into the courtyard below, onto the locked gate, onto each other. The fire escape is gone. The building still has 100 people in it. 4:57 p.m. The elevator shaft collapses. Workers who have been waiting at the elevator doors on the 9th floor, still waiting, still hoping, fall with it. 5:01 p.m. It is over. The entire Triangle Factory Fire, from first spark to last death, lasted less than 18 minutes. By 5:15 p.m., the fire was out. The building was still standing. The Triangle Factory, the floors, the brick, the concrete, had not burned. The owners had been right. The building was fireproof. Everything inside it was not. On the street, on the ledges, in the courtyard, in the elevator shaft, 146 people. The bodies were carried to the sidewalk and laid in rows. Police brought wooden coffins and horse-drawn wagons. There were not enough coffins. Workers were removed to the 26th Street Pier on the East River, where families could come to identify them. For 3 days, families walked the rows. Fathers looking for daughters. Mothers looking for daughters. Husbands looking for wives. 6 of the 146 could not be identified at all. They were buried together in a cemetery in Brooklyn. Their names unknown. The city responded in a way that surprised everyone. 100,000 people marched through the streets of Manhattan on April 5, 1911. In the rain, in silence, to mourn the dead. 400,000 more lined the streets to watch. It was the largest labor demonstration in American history to that point. And then came the question everyone was asking: who was responsible? Blanck and Isaac Harris were arrested on April 11, 1911, charged with manslaughter, specifically in the death of Margaret Schwartz, one of the workers found at the locked Green Street door. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Their defense attorney, Max Stoyer, was one of the best lawyers in New York. His strategy was elegant and brutal. He did not argue the door was unlocked. He argued the prosecution could not prove that Blanck and Harris knew the door was locked at the exact moment of the fire. Without that proof, beyond reasonable doubt, there could be no conviction. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Not guilty. In the years that followed, 23 civil lawsuits were filed on behalf of the victims' families. The owners settled all of them. The total payout, $75 per dead worker. Their insurance company paid them $400 per dead worker. Blanck and Isaac Harris made money on the fire that killed 146 of their employees. In 1913, Blanck was caught locking the exit doors at his new factory. He was fined $20. 146 people died in 18 minutes on the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors of the Asch Building. What came after their deaths changed the lives of every working person in America. Frances Perkins was standing on Washington Place watching when the bodies began to fall. She was 30 years old, a social activist who had spent years working on labor reform. She watched for 2 hours. She later said she could never close her eyes without seeing what she saw that afternoon. Frances Perkins went on to become the first female United States cabinet member, serving as Secretary of Labor under Franklin D. Roosevelt from 1933 to 1945. She is considered the architect of the New Deal: Social Security, the minimum wage, the 40-hour workweek, unemployment insurance, workers' compensation. Frances Perkins built the framework of the modern American labor system, and she said, in her memoirs, that she built it on the corner of Washington Place and Green Street, on March 25, 1911. In the year after the fire, New York State passed 34 new labor laws: factory inspections, mandatory fire drills, required sprinklers, unlocked exits, restricted working hours for women and children. The Triangle Fire is directly responsible for every fire exit sign you have ever walked past, every sprinkler head in every office building, every evacuation drill your workplace makes you do. They bought all of it with 146 lives. Because the people with the power to fix it before the fire decided that a few dollars in fines was a reasonable substitute for human life. The Asch Building still stands on the corner of Washington Place and Green Street in Manhattan. It is now part of New York University. There is a small plaque on the exterior wall. Most students walking past it don't read it. Every year, On March 25th, people gather on the sidewalk outside that building. They read the names. All 146 of them. It takes about an hour. They read Rosie Friedman. They read Yetta Weber. They read Celia Weinberg. They read 143 more. They read them because nobody went to jail, because $20 was the fine, because $75 was the settlement, because $400 was the profit, because if you don't say the names, the people who made those calculations win twice. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire was not an accident. It was a choice, made by men who decided that a locked door and a small fine was a reasonable business model. 146 people paid for that choice with their lives. Not a single person went to prison. Remember the triangle.